Born in London in '86, a stacho gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing: handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. If there's two things he loves, it's getting handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, bringing to you another exciting episode of Handhelds Around the World from over here in Crete, Greece. When away from home on my travels, handheld gaming devices have always played a large part in my life. Gaming on the go traditionally has always offered a very different experience to what we had in the living room, due to developers often having to work around technical limitations in order to deliver the best results possible. The 8-bit Game Boy for many years was the world's most popular handheld, leading to crazy ambitious efforts such as the porting of Killer Instinct to the humble platform. Years later though, Nintendo would finally give players a bit more power, with the release of the 32-bit Game Boy Advance, or even better, one of my favourite devices of all time, the Game Boy Advance SP, a beautiful flip screen handheld that features a front light and a long lasting rechargeable battery. The GBA line with its additional power offered a whole range of new possibilities for developers, which meant not only would we gain the opportunity to play many of our favourite 16-bit titles on the move for the first time, but in many cases developers would even make the effort to reimagine old titles and attempt to make them even better for the modern era. Such as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival for example, a game we looked at on here in the past, which is a port of the classic made bespoke for the handheld hardware. That included a range of new features including stages from the Street Fighter Alpha series. Even Nintendo used to put a lot of efforts into their ports, with the Super Mario Advance series games all offering bells and whistles that were absent from the original versions. There was a lot of reasons to play these gems, away from simply gaining the ability to play these games on the go for the first time. Back then, there was a lot of benefits to buying these games. It was not like nowadays when companies lazily just re-release old games from 20 years ago and expect customers to just buy them again anyway. Care and effort used to be put in, so short release windows were not necessary to make customers panic buy products twice. The era of the Game Boy Advance was a glorious period where you did not need to be an indoctrinated, corporately brainwashed fanboy to appreciate these re-releases, as in the majority of cases, these old 16-bit era games were a lot more layered than simply lazy straight ports. Out of the many classic games that would receive an updated port on the hardware, Final Fight would be among the games that would be revisited and heavily changed for the handheld system. Notoriously, the original Final Fight arcade game had already been ported to Nintendo hardware before, when the game featured as an early release for the Super Nintendo. The game would disappoint many, on the basis that it removed many of the key features that made the arcade game enjoyable. Away from the changes that would obviously need to be made to the home version, such as less enemy sprites being able to appear on screen at once, or the scaled back graphics and sound, the game was further watered down with the removal of certain stages, Guy as a playable character, and even 2-player cooperative play. The game was a shell of its arcade self. Later Capcom would try to rectify this problem somewhat by releasing Final Fight Guy, an exclusively Japanese version of the game that would allow players to play as Guy on the Super Nintendo. But in order to do so, they would remove Cody, and the industrial area and 2-player mode were still bloody not included in the title. Meaning, aside from a couple of power-ups and difficulty settings being added, Final Fight Guy may be one of the most pointless releases of all time. This then brings us around to the third time the original Final Fight would appear on Nintendo hardware, when the game would appear on the GBA. We are now in 2001, so Final Fight would be an early release for a Nintendo system once again. By this point in time, the Super Nintendo had previously seen the release of an entire trilogy of Final Fight games. So, in order to make it very clear what version of Final Fight this was, players would be presented with a game known as Final Fight 1. So, could Final Fight 1 offer a better experience than the game's first appearances on Nintendo hardware? Let's find out. The game starts off with introducing players to the classic plot of the game. That revolves around the mayor of Metro City, Mike Hagar, receiving a call from a group of criminals known as the Mad Gear Gang. So Hagar, along with his daughter Jessica's boyfriend Cody and his friend Guy, set out to save her. This intro looks pretty much the same as the arcade version, only the text is now displayed in blue Final Fantasy-like text boxes. The game features a shiny new player select screen, which, praise the Lord, lets us play as all three of the characters from the iconic original, which is a promising start when comparing this game with its Super Nintendo counterparts. As action starts, a few changes are instantaneously noticeable between this game and the version found in the arcades, most noticeably that the gameplay is zoomed in. Back in the day, this was a common measure that was implemented when it came to handheld gaming, as it made the action easier to track on handhelds that had tiny screens. You will probably also notice that more enemy sprites can appear on screen at once compared to that of the 16-bit Super Nintendo version. All in all, just looking at this opening stage, it becomes clear very quickly that the game has been made to try and deliver the best experience possible for handheld gaming. A huge complaint with previous Nintendo ports of the game was obviously the removal of the industrial area. Thankfully, that feature has been re-implemented into the game, meaning that players have the privilege here of experiencing every full Final Fight stage. Apart from features being included that should have been in the Super Nintendo version in the first bloody place, Final Fight 1 amazingly includes additional elements that were not even part of the arcade game either. Probably the most noticeable out of all of these are some brand new character sprites for some of the playable characters in the game. Whilst Mike Hagar remains the same as ever, the game offers two alternative versions of Cody and Guy to play as. Meaning, in a way, this game features 5 playable characters as opposed to just the traditional 3. These extra sprites are unlockable by defeating a certain number of enemies in the game. The 2 additional sprites who players have the opportunity to play as are Guy and Cody from the Street Fighter Alpha series, who appear to have had their sprites ripped straight from those games. This is an interesting addition that certainly makes this version stand out from other ports, and it also draws parallels with the Game Boy Advance conversion of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which would, as mentioned earlier in the video, feature Street Fighter Alpha series stages. So, both of these Capcom conversions had elements shoehorned in from the Street Fighter Alpha games, which is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Positive changes to the original game do not end here though. The first arcade game, like any classic beat 'em up, would allow players to continue after suffering a death, via inserting extra coins into the cabinet. Being a home conversion, obviously this system of continuation is not possible, so instead the game features 5 difficulty options to determine the challenge of a playthrough. These options range from very easy to very hard, allowing an adequate level of difficulty for all. If, like myself, you have spent a great deal of time in your life playing handheld systems, you will be aware that devices like the GBA are perfect for short bursts of play, whether on a short journey or sitting in a waiting room for an appointment. Whilst Final Fight already features perfect pick up and play gameplay from the go, Final Fight 1 refines the experience further by offering a save system where players can save their progress after every level. This makes the game even more pick up and play than ever before, allowing people to finish this arcade game without needing to do so in a single session. Another significant change to the game is the title's dialogue. Now, prior to every boss fight in the game, the boss characters will speak to the player via text boxes. This helps flesh out the story further and gives each of the bosses in the game a touch more character than before. For example, Sodom further demonstrates what a terrible weeb he is by telling the player to prepare to bonsai, which is humorous to say the least. Another excellent feature included in this game is that it finally allowed 2-player cooperative play on a Nintendo system, as 2 players could play this game simultaneously via the use of the Game Boy Advance link cable. Unfortunately, I've yet to experience this game cooperatively myself, but it apparently functions very well and has no slowdown, which is great stuff and a massive step up from the SNES game. Whilst we have had all these great changes made to the arcade game, sadly not all the changes though are on the positive side. Most notably, much like the Super Nintendo ports, Poison and Roxy have been omitted from the game in favour of more dull mouse sprites. This time around, this move seems to be more nonsensical than ever, as both Chun-Li and Cammy had both been appearing in Street Fighter 2 games for years, and that is without the additional Street Fighter Alpha roster members being included in Capcom games on Nintendo hardware too. So, by 2001, facing off against female sprites in a Nintendo game should neither have been shocking nor controversial, so their lack of inclusion is questionable to say the least. The only explanation at this stage for their removal is likely down to the conflicting reports that Poison is a trans character. So one of either Nintendo or Capcom clearly did not fancy going near such a rabbit hole in the year 2001. I guess it was a different time after all. I guess an additional explanation though, they just thought she looked too much like a dominatrix, so did not want sexualised characters within the game. I would say though, the game's biggest flaw is probably the title's in-game music, which is not so much a fault of the game, but rather the fault of the Game Boy Advance hardware itself. As good a device as the 32-bit handheld was, if it had any weaknesses to speak of, it was certainly the device's sound chip, which delivered terrible sound quality in comparison to home consoles that had been around for years prior. In fact, to give you an idea how little Nintendo cared about their device's sound, they did not even bother to include a headphone jack on their Game Boy Advance SPs, so I guess the system's awful sound was simply not worth listening to. With regards to Final Fight 1 though, despite a few annoyances, I don't think they could have possibly done a better job with this one than what was brought to the table. GameSpot would cover the release of this conversion, summarising that the great thing about Final Fight is that it's a timeless game. Whether it's your first time through the game or your 700th, shoulder tossing one punk into a group of his oncoming friends remains a thrilling experience. Final Fight represents straightforward arcade brawling at its absolute best. That the entire arcade game now fits in your pocket is quite frankly insane. IGN would appreciate the game too, stating, "It's hard to not like Final Fight 1 on the Game Boy Advance. The game is a classic with challenging gameplay and a real energetic feel throughout the adventure. It's not an entirely deep game, but it's very satisfying from start to finish, and the addition of the battery means that if, by some odd twist of gaming taste, you grow tired of the repetitive nature, you can just switch it off to take a break, knowing full well that you'll pop right back at the start of the level you left. This is a great example of a SNES conversion done right on the system, and it helps that the original game is a good one too. All in all, Final Fight 1 is a great example of a game that has been made perfect for handheld hardware, and the addition of features such as Street Fighter Alpha sprites make this game a memorable port, and one that is always worth a revisit, even if just because it is a novel curiosity. Final Fight 1 is certainly a lot better than what Super Nintendo owners were treated to, so it's still worth your time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed learning about this interesting Final Fight port. If you want to watch more content on this classic series, I have already made a whole series of videos on the subject for you to go back and enjoy, including videos on each instalment in the original trilogy, Final Fight Revenge for the Sega Saturn, and even the high quality fan project known as Final Fight LNS Ultimate. I have plenty of beat 'em up content available for your enjoyment. Make sure you like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to ensure you receive regular uploads covering gaming's wonderful history. I upload twice a week for your viewing pleasure. Finally, I would like to give a massive shout out to the people who ensure I can work on this content on a full-time basis. So big thank yous to the people who support this channel on Patreon. I hope you enjoy to continue to receive early access, use of my Discord, production credits, voting on future content and everything else available to you on the Patreon platform. Thanks go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Raznick, Doug Perkins, Corey I. Marsh Sr., Lou Johnson, BXL Gotham, Ryan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Cambo Rambo 82, Azrael Warakai, Keith Ferguson, Drocklin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Carlos Domingos, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, SpongeMat B, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Teddy Stickles, Langston Miller, New, Brian Barry, Selagny, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Marion Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Jarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Casting, Gregory Smoraduix, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai and Andrew Bazanski. I would like to thank each and every one of you for continuing to support this channel. It means a lot. Thank you.